My name is Sloane Harper. I'm 27 years old, and when I was 18, I sat at my mother's dining table in Greenwich, Connecticut, and placed a folder in front of her. A scholarship letter, a 4-year tuition breakdown, and a spreadsheet I had spent 6 hours building, asking for $62,000 to close the gap between my savings and a university degree, which was exactly half of what she was already committed to spending on my younger sister Bryn's full tuition at Syracuse. She didn't open the folder. She didn't look at a single line of the spreadsheet. She picked up her fork with the deliberate poise of a woman who had made her decision long before I walked into the room, and she slid a signed check for $120,000 across the table toward Bryn, who was scrolling through her phone and barely registered the moment that check landed in front of her. 9 years later, I was assigned the table behind a stone pillar near the catering entrance at my sister's wedding, the farthest seat from the family, the farthest from the microphone, the farthest from any version of the room that would end up in someone's photographs, while 40 feet away at the bar, the groom was telling his groomsmen about the visionary CEO flying in for their $8 million deal. That CEO was me, and the groom was about to discover that the woman he was signing the most important contract of his career with was the same difficult sister his fiancé had been writing off as a failure for nearly a decade. If you've ever been the one left out in the cold while someone else got everything, hit that like right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world people are listening to a story about a woman who had to build her own ladder. And if you're not subscribed yet, you need to stay for this one. Let me take you back 9 years to a dining room in Greenwich, Connecticut, on a May evening that permanently redefined my understanding of what the word family actually costs. I grew up in a white colonial house on Ridgewood Court. 4 bedrooms, a manicured lawn my father Grant mowed every Saturday at exactly 8 in the morning, like a man performing a private religious rite. A Christmas wreath replaced every season on the front door, as if the house itself needed to continuously signal its own success to the neighborhood. From the outside, we were the definition of a successful American family. From the inside, it entirely depended on which daughter you asked. My mother, Diane Harper, didn't simply run a household, she curated one, the way a museum director curates a permanent collection, with deliberate intention and a clear sense of what belonged on display and what didn't. There was no written hierarchy anywhere in the house, but the atmosphere in every room was thick with it. Bryn was the investment. I was the overhead. Bryn got private piano lessons, elite volleyball memberships with weekend tournaments across the state, and a wardrobe refreshed every September with institutional regularity. I got hand-me-down textbooks and the ambient, unspoken expectation that I should be quietly grateful for the roof above my head. Diane performed the favoritism in public, with an audience, with the practiced deliberateness of a brand manager presenting a flagship product alongside a clearance item, ensuring the distinction was visible and understood by everyone watching. At neighborhood gatherings, she introduced us the same way every time, with identical precision. "This is my daughter Bryn," she would say, her hand resting proudly on Bryn's shoulder. "She's going to change the world." Then she would gesture vaguely in my direction, already half turning toward the next neighbor she needed to work, and say, "And this is Sloane," with the same enthusiasm one might use to identify a persistent weather pattern that required no further comment. The refrigerator in our kitchen was Bryn's personal monument, every inch covered in cheerleading squad photos, honor society certificates, a dried corsage from her homecoming dance taped to the freezer handle with archival precision. One morning during my sophomore year, I achieved something genuinely undeniable. a perfect 4.0, high honor roll, a certificate printed on school cardstock with my name in bold type, and I stuck it in the center of that gallery with a magnet. By the time I got home that afternoon, it was gone. And the following morning, a new photograph of Bryn from her most recent swim meet had been taped up in exactly the same spot, as precisely aligned as if it had been measured. The fridge was getting cluttered, Diane said, not looking up from her magazine, her voice as indifferent as if she were commenting on the weather. My father, Grant, was a different kind of problem. A man who had perfected the art of being physically present in a room while remaining entirely absent from its reality. Sometimes he'd catch me in the hallway, always checking the corners first to confirm Diane wasn't within earshot, and squeeze my shoulder for a fraction of a second. 5 words, always whispered, always delivered with the furtive urgency of a man passing classified intelligence in a war zone. I'm proud of you, kid. As if acknowledging my existence out loud was an act of treason against the order Diane had built, and doing it quietly, in secret, cost him nothing and bought me nothing in return. I told myself it would change when I got into college. I had been working since I was 16, bagging groceries, tutoring underclassmen in algebra for $12 an hour, saving every dollar with the discipline of someone who already understood on an instinctive level that nobody was coming to bridge the gap for her. I got into the University of Connecticut on a partial scholarship, covering exactly half the tuition, and I just needed the family to cover the other half, $62,000 over 4 years, a figure I had calculated down to the semester, down to the estimated cost of used textbooks and bus fare. It was a fraction of what they had already committed to Bryn's future at Syracuse, and by any reasonable measure, it was the more efficient investment. Except efficiency had never been the variable Diane was optimizing for. I didn't go to that dinner table with a plea. I went in with a pitch. I printed everything at the school library: scholarship letter, tuition breakdown, a 4-year budget with lines for part-time income projections, textbook costs, and the exact dollar figure needed to close the gap. I rehearsed the delivery 3 times in the bathroom mirror, adjusting my posture until I looked like a woman who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to present it to a room that had already decided otherwise. Dinner was roast chicken, the skin too salty, the air thick with Grant's practiced silence. Bryn sat across from me scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the fact that my entire future was sitting in a manila folder beside my plate. I waited until Diane had finished her second glass of Chardonnay, then set the folder on the table. I got into UConn, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the hammer of my own heartbeat. Half scholarship. I just need help with the gap. She didn't open the folder. She didn't look at the spreadsheet I had spent 6 hours building. She picked up her fork with the unhurried poise of a woman whose decision had been made long before this moment. "Sloane, you need to learn independence," she said, pronouncing the word like a gift she was graciously bestowing, rather than the verdict she was reading into the record of my life. I pointed out the only thing that was logically, undeniably true. You're paying Bryn's full tuition at Syracuse. Diane folded her cloth napkin with sharp, clean creases. Bryn's situation is different. She has a specific kind of potential that requires nurturing. You, Sloane, are more resilient. You're built for the struggle. I looked at Grant. He stared at his plate as if it contained the answer to a question he was afraid to fully form. His fork hadn't moved. The silence coming off him was not the silence of a man who disagreed. It was the silence of a man who had agreed with everything and had simply chosen the comfort of his chair over the cost of his conscience. "This discussion is over," Diane said, her voice carrying the finality of a ruling being entered into the record. "If you want it badly enough, you'll find a way. That's what strong people do." I gathered my papers, my hands shaking hard enough that I had to grip the folder against my chest to keep the trembling invisible. Later that evening, in the hallway, Grant caught my arm, and for one fraction of a second, I believed he was finally going to do something real. Reach into the silence he'd been carrying all night and pull out a word of genuine rebellion. "Your mother has her reasons," he said, his eyes moving toward the living room where the television was already on. "Just give it time." Then he walked away, back to the comfortable version of peace that was purchased entirely by my silence. I'll pause right here. If you've ever had someone who knew the truth and chose silence anyway, hit that like and tell me in the comments, was it harder being hurt by the cruel one or the coward? Now let's get back to what I did next. That night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom and packed one suitcase. Only what I had bought with my own money, only what was genuinely mine. I had $340 in my checking account, and I made a decision I haven't reversed in 9 years. 5:14 in the morning. The Connecticut pre-dawn was gray and damp. The kitchen smelled of last night's chicken and furniture polish. I set my house key on the counter beside the coffee maker, the one Diane ran every morning at exactly 6:15, ensuring she would be the first to find what I was leaving behind. No note. There was nothing left to explain to people who had already decided what I was. As I moved through the garage, the motion sensor light clicked on with a cold, white brightness. My father's Buick sat in its usual spot, engine off, his hands resting at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel in the dark. He saw me through the windshield. I saw him through the glass. Neither of us moved. He didn't open the door. I didn't knock on the glass. And we held each other's gaze for 3 seconds that compressed 9 years of everything unsaid between us into a single, irreversible silence. In his face, I saw the specific shame of a man who has made his choice and is fully aware of what it has cost. Then I turned and walked to the bus stop on Farmington Avenue, the wheels of my suitcase clicking against the concrete like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet name. The bus to the Yukon campus took 90 minutes. 90 minutes of watching the manicured driveways of Greenwich compress into Hartford's density, then open into the university town that felt like the first geography that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. My dorm room was a concrete box with a thin institutional mattress and a window that didn't fully close, letting the damp spring air in steadily. I had no sheets, no blankets. In the urgency of leaving, I had forgotten the fundamentals of comfort. I slept in my denim jacket that first night, curled on the plastic-wrapped mattress, telling myself this was the beginning, not the end. By the end of that first week, I had 3 jobs: a dishwasher at a greasy Italian place called Sal's Kitchen on Route 44, an overnight cashier at a Shell station on Route 1, and part of the weekend cleaning crew for the campus athletic building. My schedule was a jigsaw puzzle where every piece was a different quality of exhaustion. 4 hours of sleep here, a 90-minute nap on a library couch there, my body running on the kind of sustained adrenaline that eventually starts eating its own infrastructure. 2 weeks in, I called Diane. "You made your choice," she said, her voice stripped of anything resembling warmth. "Don't call to make me feel guilty." 7 seconds. That was the entire bridge between my old life and my new one, measured in real time. I saved her number under a new contact name. Do not answer. That evening, a text arrived from Bryn. Mom says you're being dramatic. Just come home and apologize. I stared at those words for a long time in the blue-lit quiet of the Shell station, and I understood the narrative being built without my participation. I wasn't the daughter they had turned away at a dinner table with a folder full of careful, earnest work. I was the difficult one who had manufactured her own exile. Freshman year didn't just challenge me. It systematically dismantled every assumption I had about what I was capable of tolerating. I fell asleep in organic chemistry twice, my forehead dropping against the laminated desk with a sound that echoed across the lecture hall. One Tuesday night during the dinner rush at Sal's, I spilled boiling pasta water across my left hand, a second-degree burn across 3 fingers that turned white at the center and angry red at the edges. I couldn't afford the emergency room copay, couldn't afford the time off the shift, so I wrapped it in gauze from the gas station first aid kit, secured it with electrical tape, and walked into my 8 o'clock lecture the next morning with my hand throbbing in rhythm with the professor's voice. My GPA hovered at 2.9, the exact threshold between keeping my scholarship and losing the one thing standing between me and being asked to leave. Dr. Marcus Thorne noticed. He taught my introductory health informatics seminar, silver-haired, always in a silk bow tie, with the kind of attention that looked past the surface of a person and straight into their structural integrity. After class one Tuesday, he asked me to stay. You're exhausted, he said. Not an accusation, just a clean clinical reading. He pulled out a folder of internal grants and paid research positions and placed it on the desk between us. You're too smart to burn out before sophomore year, he said. Let me help you find a structure that doesn't cost you your hands. He used his position to secure me a paid research role in his lab, $400 a month, which wasn't lavish, but was the precise oxygen I needed to stop drowning at the pace I had been drowning. For the first time since arriving at UConn, I saw the sun rise without having worked through the night to earn the privilege. Back in Greenwich, Diane was busy rewriting history. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, though the official version circulated to the family was considerably more creative. She had told everyone she'd reached out, that I had refused, that she had tried everything. Aunt Claire, Diane's older sister and the family network's most reliable echo chamber, called me afterward, her voice carrying the settled condescension of a woman who has never once questioned a story handed to her by someone she trusted. I tried to explain. The folder, the dinner, the check, the bus, the fact that Grant had watched every moment of it from behind a car windshield and done nothing. Claire cut me off before I could finish. You always were the difficult one. The line went dead, and with it went the entire extended family, lost to a lie that was simply easier to believe than the truth. That same week, Bryn posted a photo on Facebook, a brand new Audi A4 in ibis white parked in the Ridgewood Court driveway with a massive red bow on the hood. Caption, "Best parents ever. Off to Syracuse." Diane's comment sat immediately below. Anything from my girl. 87 likes. 87 people tapping their approval into a screen, validating a disparity with the effortless participation of people who had no idea what they were endorsing. I took a screenshot, not out of bitterness, but as a cold data point filed in the archive of my own life. That was the night I stopped waiting for any version of a miracle from Ridgewood Court and started building a life that didn't require their permission to exist. Zoe Reyes sat down next to me in Biology 201 on the first day of my sophomore year, dropping into the seat beside me with the controlled collapse of a soldier reaching a temporary defensive position. Dark hair pulled back with a fraying rubber band, circles under her eyes that matched mine, a thermos of espresso large enough to suggest she had given serious logistical thought to the problem of sustained consciousness. "You look exactly how I feel," she said. "It's a compliment," she added before I could respond. "It means you're still showing up when most people would have folded." Zoe was pre-med, the daughter of Colombian immigrants who ran a dry cleaning shop in Bridgeport. 16-hour days, everything redirected toward keeping her enrolled and her textbook stack current. The difference between our families was a moral canyon. Her parents wanted desperately to support her and lacked the capital. My parents had the capital and had chosen to withhold it. Zoe became the first person I told the whole story to. The folder, the dinner, the check, the Audi, the 87 likes. Sitting on a splintered bench outside the science building at 11 at night, both of us eating $2 sandwiches from the Shell station because the campus dining hall was a luxury neither of us could justify. Zoe didn't offer me a tissue. She wiped mustard off her chin and said, "Sloane, you don't owe them a redemption arc. You owe yourself a life." I carried those 10 words like a weapon for the next 9 years. That semester, under Dr. Thorne's guidance, I started writing a research paper that stopped being an assignment and became something closer to an obsession. 12 pages on data architecture for small clinic patient record management, targeting the specific inefficiency gap between enterprise-level EHR software that small practices could never afford and the archaic paper systems that were a federal compliance disaster in slow motion. I wrote most of it between midnight and 2 in the morning in the break room at Sal's kitchen, the overhead light buzzing faintly, the air carrying the residual smell of industrial degreaser and cold tomato paste. It was dry, technical, and deeply unsexy to anyone outside the field, but to me, it was the first thing I had ever built that felt entirely sovereign. No Harper influence embedded in it, no hand-me-down resentment woven through the logic, just clean structural thinking applied to a real problem. Dr. Thorne read the full draft in one sitting. "This isn't just a paper," he said, looking at me over his reading glasses. "This is a blueprint for a real solution." Those 12 pages, written on a sticky-keyed laptop in a break room on Route 44, would eventually become the foundation of ClearPath Health. But that part comes later. The end of sophomore year moved to take me under. Sal's kitchen closed, the building sold to a developer, the owner retired, the sign removed on a Friday night. And 40% of my monthly income vanished without notice or severance. I ran the math 3 times, willing my own arithmetic to produce a different outcome, and it never did. 6 weeks of runway. After that, 0. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Do Not Answer, and held my thumb over the call button for 11 seconds. I counted each one deliberately, and then set the phone down and looked at the ceiling and decided, for the second time in my life, that I was not going to make that call. I walked to the campus job board instead and signed up for 2 more positions: tutoring freshmen in statistics and freelance data entry for an insurance office in Hartford. Zoe started leaving granola bars and protein shakes in my backpack without a word, a silent, practical acknowledgement between 2 people who understood exactly what the other was navigating and had decided that the most dignified form of support is the kind that requires no discussion. The lifeline arrived in Dr. Thorne's office, not a warning about my fading performance, but a letter with a university seal placed on the desk in front of me. A competitive summer research fellowship, fully funded, housing included, a stipend that actually covered real food. "You earned this," he said, his voice cutting through the haze of exhaustion I was operating inside. "Not because of your circumstances, because your work is better than anyone else's in this building." That fellowship saved my academic career and introduced me to a professional network that would eventually, by a route I could not have predicted, lead me to Cole Mercer. Take a moment right here. If you've ever had one person see something in you that your whole family couldn't be bothered to notice, drop a comment and tell me about them. Subscribe if you haven't, because this story is only just arriving at the part where everything starts to break open. Now let's keep going. I graduated summa cum laude on a scorching Sunday in May, in a stadium holding 4,000 people, none of whom were mine. Zoe stood in the bleachers with a handmade sign in neon purple marker, Dr. Walsh, eventually, and screamed my name with a volume that drowned out the polite, measured applause of every family seated around her. And I learned that afternoon that one person screaming for you is louder than an entire family of silences will ever manage to be. We drove to a Greasy Spoon diner off Route 9 in Zoe's beat-up Honda, split a plate of cheese fries in a vinyl booth, and called it a coronation. No bouquets from Grant, no reservation made by Diane, no family standing in the background of the milestone. Just Zoe and food we had genuinely, legitimately earned. Within a month, I had a job, an entry-level software analyst position at a boutique health tech firm operating out of a repurposed warehouse just outside Hartford. 12 employees, coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and broken promises, and more legacy database problems than anyone else on the team wanted to touch. I learned fast, got promoted once, and then again, surviving entirely on the cold, specific adrenaline of a person who has no safety net and therefore cannot afford to miscalculate. By 24, I was sketching the architecture of something larger on napkins and meeting agendas during my 45-minute commute from a studio apartment in Cambridge. A healthcare data platform built specifically for small clinics caught in the gap between enterprise software they couldn't afford and paper systems that were a federal audit disaster in slow motion. I used every cent of my savings, secured a small SBA loan after being turned down by 4 banks who didn't like my lack of collateral, and I named the company Clear Path Health. For the first year, it was a folding table, a second-hand server, and the stubborn, specific belief of a woman who had been told she was overhead and had decided to build an empire to disprove the assessment. I'd been briefly engaged in my mid-20s to Derek Walsh, a Boston corporate attorney who had mistaken my ambition for a hobby and my 80-hour work weeks for a temporary phase that would resolve once we were married. The relationship didn't survive a realistic assessment of who I actually was, but by the time we ended it, all my business filings, conference badges, and professional correspondence read Sloane Walsh, and I never changed them back. It felt like a name I had forged in boardrooms rather than inherited at a table where I had been treated as an afterthought. Then, on a rainy Tuesday while I was debugging a payroll integration at 11 at night, my phone lit up with a Connecticut area code I hadn't seen in 6 years. "Hey," Bryn said, her voice stripped of the golden child confidence I remembered. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling. I need a financial favor. $8,000. "For what, Bryn?" She didn't answer clearly. "It's complicated." "No," I said. One word. Final as a door built for exactly this. She hung up. 30 minutes later, an unknown number lit up my screen, and before I could stop myself, I answered it, and Diane's voice came through the line like a blade, cold, precise, at full pressure. "How dare you refuse your own sister, after everything this family has done for you?" I pressed the red button and stood in the resulting silence, replaying Bryn's opening words. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling." Either Diane had developed supernatural prescience, or my sister had lied to me in the first 5 seconds of the first conversation we'd had in nearly a decade. Some patterns in the Harper household, it turned out, were as immutable as the stone driveways on Ridgewood Court. Diane never absorbed rejection quietly. She had never operated on a defensive model when she could incinerate the opposition from a distance and call it heartbreak. Within a week, my phone was receiving calls from cousins, family friends, and people I barely remembered, all of them following the same script she had written and distributed with the efficiency of a woman who has been managing her own reputation for 30 years. In Diane's updated narrative, I was the cold-hearted tech entrepreneur who had forgotten where she came from. Sloane has money now. Sloane refused her struggling sister. Sloane has become something unrecognizable. Then came the Facebook post, a masterpiece of narcissistic theater, vague enough to function as an accusation without constituting a confession. Some children forget where they come from. A mother's heart can only break so many times before it turns to stone. She didn't name me. She didn't need to. 142 likes. Bryn's comment pinned at the top. "Love you, Mom. Always here for you." The devoted daughter and the wounded mother, staged for an audience of Greenwich neighbors who had only ever been offered one side of the broadcast. I saw the post on my laptop in the dark of my apartment. I didn't react. I blocked both accounts, closed the laptop, and went back to a client integration that was due at 6 in the morning. I'll stop right here. If you've ever had your silence turned into someone else's story, hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when two worlds finally collide. Now let's get back to it. 2 years after that phone call, ClearPath Health closed its Series A funding round. $4.2 million in venture capital, 28 employees, a glass-walled office in downtown Boston with actual ergonomic chairs and coffee that tasted like something a human being would voluntarily choose. That October, I was invited to speak at a major healthcare technology conference at the Navy Pier Convention Center in Chicago. 200 C-suite executives and hospital operators looking for the next significant operational disruption. I presented the ClearPath platform, demonstrating how our proprietary algorithm reduced clinic onboarding time by 60% and integrated with existing EHR systems without the enterprise-level price tag that made similar solutions inaccessible to independent practices. Afterward, a man in a sharp gray blazer introduced himself near the catering table with a firm handshake and the direct, sustained eye contact of someone accustomed to being the decision-maker in the room. Cole Mercer, CFO, Summit Medical Group. We're expanding aggressively, and we've been looking for exactly this kind of infrastructure. We exchanged cards. I entered his name in my digital notes that night. Cole Mercer, Summit Medical Group. Follow-up, November. Just a name. A potential $2.8 million contract. At O'Hare, waiting for my flight back to Logan, a notification appeared on my phone. Bryn Harper has sent you a friend request. A new account. A workaround for the wall I had built 2 years earlier. I tapped decline and put my phone away. I didn't know yet that Cole Mercer was about to become my sister's fiancé, or that the contract building between our two companies was about to act as the wrecking ball for the 9-year lie my family had constructed on the foundation of my silence. 6 months later, the deal with Summit Medical Group was approaching its final stage. Contract value $2.8 million, the largest in ClearPath's history, the kind of number that moves a company from promising startup to established operator. As part of the final compliance verification, Summit requested that ClearPath build out a credentialing module, a system that tracks staff licenses, university degrees, and certifications for federal audit purposes, using Summit's full personnel roster as sample data. Standard procedure, routine workflow, not a sting operation, just a system doing exactly what I had designed it to do. Then, a heavy cream envelope arrived at my Cambridge apartment. Gold-embossed lettering, a Connecticut postmark, the kind of paper that signals a significant expenditure by people who believe that the weight of cardstock carries social meaning. Inside, a wedding invitation. Together with their families, Bryn Harper and Cole Mercer request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Willowbrook Estate, Old Lyme, Connecticut, Saturday, June 14th. I read it twice. The air in my kitchen shifted in a way I felt before I fully processed the reason for it. Cole Mercer. My sister was marrying my largest client. When I set the invitation down and picked it up again, a folded piece of torn notebook paper slipped from behind the RSVP card. Small, uneven, the handwriting of a man who had spent years learning to take up as little space as possible. Please come. Dad. Grant hadn't signed it Grant and Diane, just Dad. Slipped in like contraband, a secret message from a man inside a Greenwich colonial who had finally found one act of courage small enough to fit inside an envelope. He didn't know what I did for a living. He had never thought to ask. He sent it because, for all his cowardice and his 9 years of strategic absence, some part of him still wanted both his daughters in the same room. I called Zoe that night, my voice unsteady for the first time in years. My sister is marrying my biggest client. Does he know who you are? He knows me as Sloane Walsh, CEO. He has no idea I'm the difficult sister. What are you going to do? I looked at the torn notebook paper, the shaky, small letters of a man who couldn't call, but couldn't stay entirely silent. I'm going to go, I said, and I'm going to finish this. Willowbrook Estate occupied 12 acres of rolling vineyard just north of the Connecticut shoreline. String lights looped between old oak trees, white linen on every surface, a string quartet playing something tasteful near the garden entrance. It looked like a spread from Architectural Digest. It looked like money. Diane and Grant's money. The capital they had carefully guarded while I was sleeping in a denim jacket on a plastic dormitory mattress on a scholarship I had earned entirely without them. Zoe and I arrived at 4:40. I wore a simple navy silk dress, one watch I had bought myself the month ClearPath hit its first $1 million in revenue. Zoe wore black. moral support and funeral energy," she whispered as we stepped onto the gravel path. "Both are appropriate today." We had barely cleared the welcome table when Aunt Claire materialized, champagne in hand, with the same pinched expression she had worn the last time she called me the difficult one. "I was invited," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line, before she could frame the question. She found no ammunition ready and retreated toward the bar. Then Diane appeared, moving through the crowd with the fluid authority of a woman who had been performing effortless hostess for 30 years. Champagne-colored silk, hair set to rigid perfection, smile running at absolute maximum wattage. When she saw me, the smile froze into a porcelain mask. She crossed the lawn and pulled me behind a trellis of white roses. "What are you doing here?" "Attending my sister's wedding, Diane." "You don't belong in this frame. Not after 9 years." "Whose choice was that?" Her jaw tightened, a small muscle working beneath her foundation. "Don't make a scene. This is Bryn's moment." "I have no intention of making a scene," I said, my voice carrying the calm of 9 years of construction. "But the truth has a way of showing up without being invited." She studied me for 3 long seconds, then turned back to her guests with practiced brightness and folded me into her performance like a loose thread she needed to tuck away before the photographers arrived. Then a hand settled on my shoulder. I turned. Grant Harper stood behind me, suit slightly too large, eyes red-rimmed and wet. And without a word, he pulled me into his arms and held on with the grip of a man who has been rehearsing an apology for 9 years and has arrived at the moment to find that every word he prepared has completely deserted him. I went rigid for a fraction of a second, my body having spent a decade learning not to expect this from him. And then I exhaled and placed my hand on his back. "Hi, Dad." He nodded into my shoulder and held tighter, a silent, desperate acknowledgement arriving 9 years too late, but arriving nonetheless. Bryn found me 10 minutes later, emerging through the crowd in white tulle, her face cycling through shock, calculation, and performance in the time it took her to cross the reception floor, landing finally and deliberately on warmth. She threw her arms around me in front of a dozen watching guests, her voice pitched to carry, the hug tight enough for the photograph and loose enough to mean nothing. "I can't believe you're here! Mom didn't say!" "She didn't know," I said, just quietly enough for only her to hear. A flicker of genuine, unmanaged fear crossed her face before the practiced smile reclaimed it. Diane materialized at my elbow, her hand closing around my arm with the grip of someone who intends to steer, and she walked me to the table she had assigned, positioned directly behind a massive stone pillar near the catering entrance, the farthest seat from the head table, from the microphone, from the family, from any version of this reception that would be photographed or remembered. "We didn't expect you," she said, eyes settling on the pillar. This was the only space available. Zoe sat beside me and said nothing, her expression saying everything. 40 feet away at the bar, Cole Mercer was gesturing with the relaxed enthusiasm of someone sharing genuinely good news, telling his groomsmen about the visionary CEO whose platform is transforming their entire operation. He was describing me. He simply didn't know that the visionary was currently sitting behind a stone pillar in a navy dress, listening to every word he said. The speeches began after the main course. Then Diane stood and took the microphone with the ease of a woman who had been born expecting one to be waiting for her. The performance was, as always, immaculate. "I want to talk about raising a daughter," she began, and my fingers tightened around my water glass until the skin over my knuckles went white. She talked about sacrifice, about late nights, about pouring everything into a child's future. She talked about Bryn's incredible academic career at Syracuse, her commitment to healthcare, her independence. "I raised my daughter to be independent," Diane said, her voice carrying across 200 guests with the full conviction of a woman who has convinced herself completely. The word arrived in my chest with the specific, precise weight of something that has been a wound for a very long time and has just been pressed on by a thumb that knows exactly where the scar is. The same word she had used as a weapon at the dinner table 9 years ago to justify sending me away with a folder of careful work she hadn't bothered to open. Now being worn as a crown and bestowed on the daughter who had never worked a single overnight shift in her life. "Bryn is proof that when a family truly invests in their children, beautiful things happen." 200 people applauded. I didn't move. Zoe's hand pressed against mine under the tablecloth. Diane's gaze drifted across the room with deliberate precision and settled on the pillar where I sat. A pause. Practiced. Perfectly timed. "And of course, we love all our children," she said, the words as flat and disposable as a footnote appended to a document that was already finished. Then, "Why does it feel like today our family is finally, truly complete?" Applause. She returned to her seat, luminous in the light of her own performance. The plan was to sit there, finish my water, and leave quietly. But then Cole Mercer walked toward my table with Brett Coleman, his business partner, and the plan became irrelevant in the space of 3 steps. Brett saw me first. He stopped mid-stride. "Sloane. Sloane Walsh? From ClearPath?" Cole turned, and his face underwent a complete reconfiguration, the social machinery of the evening grinding to a halt behind his eyes as the arithmetic of the situation began to resolve. His eyes dropped to the place card on the table, then back to my face. "But your name? Walsh?" I stood, reclaiming my full height. "Hi, Cole. I've gone by Walsh professionally for years. My legal name is Sloane Harper." The air between us changed in a way that was measurable. I watched him do the math. The last name. The Greenwich connection. The estranged older sister Bryn had referenced only in passing, always vaguely, always with the same dismissive economy of words. "She never told me," he trailed off. "She never mentioned that her sister was the CEO of the company you're signing with. She said I had problems, that I was struggling." People at the nearest tables were turning. Diane appeared in seconds, her smile developing visible fractures at the edges. "Cole, darling, don't bother Sloane. She's here to enjoy the evening." Cole looked at Diane like a man who has just encountered a stranger wearing a face he thought he recognized. "Business, Mrs. Harper? Do you have any idea who this is? This is the founder of ClearPath Health. I am about to sign an $8 million contract expansion with her company." Diane's face did something I had spent 30 years believing was structurally impossible. The mask didn't merely slip, it shattered. And for one unguarded second, raw, recalculating terror was the only thing left where the performance had been. Then the smile returned, thinner and tighter than anything I had seen on her before. Well, isn't that a wonderful surprise? Across the reception, Bryn had gone completely still. She set her champagne glass down and started walking toward us, her white tulle trailing behind her. And for the first time in her life as the family's golden child, I saw genuine, unmanaged fear in my sister's eyes. Not of me, but of the collision between the two separate realities she had been simultaneously maintaining. Cole didn't wait. He was already moving toward the stage with the momentum of a man who has understood that he has been living inside a fiction and has decided to address the audience directly. He took the microphone. "Everyone, one quick announcement." 200 faces turned toward him. "I just discovered something significant. The CEO of ClearPath Health, the woman who is transforming how our entire medical group operates, is here tonight. And she happens to be Bryn's older sister." The string quartet stopped mid-note. "Sloane Walsh, or Sloane Harper, built her company from a single folding table with no family support, writing the first prototype herself while working 3 jobs on a partial scholarship. She is a Forbes 30 Under 30 finalist in healthcare technology, and she has been sitting at the back table behind a stone pillar near the catering entrance for the past 2 hours. Silence. Absolute, total, electric. Then applause building from a confused scatter into something sustained and real as 200 people craned their necks toward the pillar and tried to reconcile the woman sitting there with every version of the story they had been told. I stood and nodded once. "Thank you, Cole. This is Bryn's day." But it was already too late. 5 minutes later, Cole appeared beside me on the terrace, his phone in his hand, the warmth of the announcement replaced entirely by a cold, controlled fury. "My compliance team sent the final due diligence report 3 hours ago. I just opened it." He held up the screen. The ClearPath credentialing module had returned its results with the mechanical, indifferent accuracy of a system built to find the truth regardless of the cost. "Bryn's name is on the flag list," he said, his voice carrying the specific quiet of a man taking apart his own future carefully, because losing control of the process is not an option he has left. No master's degree on record. State University has no documentation of her ever graduating. She withdrew sophomore year. "I know," I said. "The verification came through my compliance office on Friday. There is no playbook for telling your most important client that their fiancé's credentials don't exist." Cole gripped the terrace railing until his knuckles went white, the golden hour light spreading across the vineyard below with a beautiful, complete indifference to the reality on the balcony. "I'm going to ask her once," he said, his voice dropping to the register of a closing argument, "in front of the people who matter. Because if she lies to my face one more time, in front of my partners, in front of everyone watching, then I'll know exactly who I almost made my wife." He walked back inside. I followed 3 steps behind, my heartbeat loud in the silence of my own chest. Bryn was near the wedding cake, attempting to reclaim the narrative with a cluster of bridesmaids. "Bryn," Cole said, not loudly but carrying the authority of a man who has decided the truth is more important than the comfort of every person in the room. "Did you graduate from the state program?" The bridesmaid stepped back. Bryn laughed, short, brittle, the sound of a mechanism failing under load it wasn't designed to carry. "Baby, what? Of course I—" "Did you?" Her eyes moved left, then right. the reception had achieved a perfect, suspended vacuum of silence. "Can we please talk about this somewhere private?" "You told me you had a master's degree. You told your parents you graduated with honors. You have a framed degree on your office wall. Did you lie to me?" Diane materialized at Bryn's side. "Cole, lower your voice. This is simply a misunderstanding." "Did you know, Diane?" He turned on her with the controlled fury of a man who has just understood the full architectural scope of what he has been standing inside. "You told me she graduated. You told my family she had a dedicated career in healthcare. Was any of that true?" He turned to the 200 guests who had not moved. "She never graduated," he said, clearly enough for every table to hear. "She has been working as a receptionist under fabricated credentials for 3 years. The only sound was a wine glass hitting the flagstone floor at table 6. Bryn's composure gave way all at once, the entire scaffolding of the performance collapsing inward, tears breaking through her makeup, the golden child dissolving into the frightened woman underneath who had spent 24 years becoming exactly what someone else needed and had never once become herself. Cole set the microphone down on the nearest table, turned, and looked at me standing 10 feet away in the wreckage of the evening. Still, quiet, exactly where I had always been. "Sloane Harper is the only honest person in this family," he said. Then he walked toward the exit and didn't look back. I need to pause right here. If you've ever been labeled the difficult one and turned out to be the only honest person standing in the room, drop a comment and tell me. Hit that like if you've ever watched justice arrive without revenge and felt something you couldn't quite name. Now, let's get to what happens after. Diane turned to me, every layer of performance stripped away, her face bare and fractured in a way I had never witnessed in 30 years of being her daughter. "Are you happy now? You destroyed your sister's life." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I stood in the center of the wreckage she had spent decades constructing, and I spoke clearly enough for every nearby table to hear, not because I wanted an audience, but because I was finished with the era of whispered conversations that only served her narrative. "No, Diane. Bryn's lies destroyed Bryn's life. ClearPath's standard compliance process found the truth. That isn't revenge. That's accountability. You could have buried it and committed corporate fraud, risked 28 employees and the safety of every patient in Cole's clinics to protect a Harper family fiction? No, I won't sacrifice my integrity for your image. Not anymore." Something shifted in the room, a measurable tilt in the collective weight of 200 people's perception. Aunt Claire pressed her hand over her mouth as understanding arrived with the force of something that has been resisted for 9 years. Diane looked around the reception and understood, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, that the room was not with her. She turned and walked toward the parking lot, her heels striking the flagstones in a rapid, uneven rhythm that was the closest thing to panic I had ever seen her produce. I picked up my clutch. I was halfway across the gravel parking lot when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Sloane, wait!" I stopped, but didn't turn around. The evening air was warm and salt-edged, the crickets starting their chorus in the vineyard rows. "I have nothing left to say, Dad." "Then let me say something." His voice was winded and stripped of its habitual strategic caution. I turned. Grant Harper stood under the last string of lights at the edge of the lot, tie loose, eyes swollen and red, looking 10 years older than the man who had watched me leave through a car windshield on a gray Connecticut morning 9 years ago. "I knew it was wrong," he said, and the confession came out with the sound of something held under sustained pressure for a very long time, finally giving way all at once. "Every single day, Sloane. Every single day, I knew what she was doing was wrong, and I said nothing. Because it was easier to lose you quietly than to fight her loudly. And that makes me worse than her, because she at least believed she was right. I knew she was wrong, and I chose the quiet version of peace anyway." The word sat between us like a ghost that had been waiting 9 years for someone to finally say its name. "That wasn't peace, Dad," I said, my voice carrying no anger, only the profound, bone-deep fatigue of a woman who has been carrying a truth for 9 years and has finally set it down in the right place. "That was abandonment. You traded my future for a quiet dinner table." "I know." The silence that followed was the heaviest of my life. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I can't forgive you tonight. Maybe not for a long time." "That's fair. I need to go." He nodded. "Drive safe." 2 words, simple, small, offering nothing but themselves and not a vehicle for anything else. Zoe was waiting by the car, engine running. She pulled onto the highway without asking what he said, and the lights of the old lime shoreline faded into the rearview mirror, and I didn't cry until we hit I-95 North, the adrenaline finally washing out of my system and leaving only the cold, clear reality of everything the evening had severed and everything it had set free. The fallout came in waves. Within 48 hours, the calls arriving from Connecticut area codes were different in kind. Not accusations, not distributed scripts, but apologies. Aunt Claire called Monday morning, her voice stripped of its settled certainty. "I believed everything your mother told me for 9 years. Every single word. I was wrong." I thanked her. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. 9 years of being the family's designated failure is not resolved by a 3-minute phone call. Cole's team at Summit Medical Group audited Bryn's employment history with the thoroughness of people who understand they have been operating with compromised data and need to know the full scope of the problem. No degree, no certification, a receptionist who had been signing internal documents under a fabricated title for 3 years. Cole emailed me that Tuesday. "The contract with ClearPath remains on track. Your company's integrity is the specific reason we're moving forward." The contract was signed the following week, an $8 million expansion that established ClearPath Health as the defining infrastructure platform in the New England healthcare technology corridor. Diane posted once, a long, tearful paragraph about families torn apart by jealousy. But the Greenwich neighbors who had attended Willowbrook that Saturday were no longer operating from a single information source, and the comment section didn't cooperate. She deleted the post within 4 hours and retreated into a silence that felt, for the first time in 30 years of knowing her, like a genuine surrender. 2 weeks later, a small padded envelope arrived at my Boston office. No return address, a Connecticut postmark. Inside was a piece of paper I hadn't seen in 12 years. My high honor roll certificate from sophomore year of high school. The one Diane had removed from the refrigerator the same afternoon I dared to put it up. Slightly bent at the corners, yellowed along the edges, carrying the faint smell of an old wooden desk drawer. A Post-it note adhered to the back in my father's uneven handwriting. It was never cluttered. It was always yours. He had kept it for 12 years, hidden it from Diane for 12 years. A small, private, entirely insufficient act of rebellion that he had never had the courage to show me until the structure of the life he had chosen finally collapsed around all of them. It wasn't close to enough to undo a decade of silence, but I held it at my desk for a long time, looking out at the Boston skyline turning amber in the late afternoon light. And I understood something I hadn't needed a piece of paper to confirm, but that it was good, finally, to hold in my hands. On a Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of strong coffee and wrote my mother an email. Not a text, not a phone call, because Diane performed at her best in real time, and I wasn't giving her a stage. Mom, I don't hate you, but I won't pretend anymore. You chose Bryn not because she needed you, but because she was a project you could control. I was inconvenient because I was real. If you want a relationship with me, it begins with honesty. No performances, no posts, no managed versions of events. The choice is yours. I hit send and felt the final chord in the old architecture release. She never replied. Narcissists don't negotiate. They rule or they retreat. Diane Harper retreated, and I let her go. Grant calls me every Sunday at 5:30 now, with the regularity of a man who has decided that showing up on time is the one form of reliability he has left to offer. The calls run about 10 minutes. He talks about the weather in Greenwich, a documentary he watched, the neighbor's new dog. He never mentions Diane, and I never ask. It isn't a grand reconciliation. It's a crack in the wall, just wide enough to let a line of light through. And for now, that is what it is. As for Bryn, she enrolled at a community college in New Haven, a real program this time, real transcripts, real work for the first time in her life toward credentials that would actually belong to her. She sent me a 4-page handwritten letter 3 months after the wedding. I spent so long becoming exactly who she needed me to be, she wrote, that I forgot to become anyone real. I haven't written back yet. Some letters need time before the person who received them can offer the answer they actually deserve. I'm at my desk now, at 6:30 in the morning, the same hour I used to be scrubbing grease traps at Sal's kitchen, the same hour the world felt smallest and most uncertain, the same hour I learned to make the most consequential decisions of my life simply because there was no one around to tell me I was wrong for making them. The Boston skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows is turning a deep, defiant orange. The kind of light that fills every space it enters without negotiating its right to be there. There are 28 desks out there, and in an hour, the people who sit at them will walk in and build something that matters. Something built on infrastructure that began with 12 pages written in a break room that smelled of tomato paste and industrial soap, by a woman who had no safety net and no family backing, and no one waiting to catch her if she fell. I don't feel vindicated. Vindication would mean I needed them to be wrong in order to be right, and I didn't need that. I needed to be free, and I built that freedom myself, piece by piece, in the spaces that were left to me. Diane's voice still plays in my head on certain mornings. Resilience is a gift, Sloane. The word she used as a justification, as a sentence, as a way to explain why the overhead didn't deserve the same investment as the flagship. She was right about exactly one thing. Resilience is a gift. She was catastrophically wrong about who gave it to me. I built it myself, in cold dorm rooms and overnight shell station shifts and grease trap mornings, and the specific, sustained silence of a woman who decided that the best response to a false narrative wasn't a counter-narrative. It was a life they couldn't edit. My name is Sloane Harper. I'm 27 years old. I have a company I built from a folding table, a best friend who held my hand when the world was burning, and a life that belongs entirely and completely to me. And for the first time in 9 years, I slept through the night. See you in the next one.